Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of Sunni Defense. And in this one, we're going to be talking about the popular hadith of the 12 Caliphs, or the 12 Khulafa. Now, if you do not know what this hadith is, it's basically a hadith found in Sunni books. It's found in the books of the Muslims. However, it mentions 12 leaders. And because it mentions 12 leaders, and specifically the number 12, the 12 or Shia are gonna quote it, and they're gonna quote it against Sunnis and use it as quote-unquote evidence for their beliefs. Now, who narrates the hadith of the 12 Caliphs? It's mainly narrated by Jundub ibn Samurah ibn Jundub. And Samurah ibn Jundub is a Sahabi. He was a young Sahabi. He went, as I recall the narration states, he went with his father, and the Prophet ﷺ was delivering a sermon. And in this sermon, he was telling them some prophecies, things that will happen in the future. And he mentioned something about Islam being great in the time of 12 rulers, or Islam being strong in the time of 12 rulers. And then he mentioned something after it, but Samurah, he never heard it because there was loud noises, there was a lot of people, so he never heard. So Samurah, he goes and he asks the people around him, what did the Prophet say? And they tell him the Prophet says all 12 of them will be from Quraysh. So this is the hadith of the 12. It is only narrated by him authentically. You can probably find it narrated from somebody else, but it'll be weak. The only authentic narration is this one. For example, there is a version narrated, for example, from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, but that is weak. And we will even go over it next in our video. So that is it, and that is the text. The Prophet mentions 12 Khulafa, 12 Caliphs. And the Khalifa in Arabic is basically the person to succeed the Prophet ﷺ as ruler after him, as the one in charge after him. In some narrations, the Prophet says Khalifa, in some narrations, the Prophet says Amir, 12 Umara, 12 chiefs. For the Arabs, both of these terms were used interchangeably. They both mean leaders. They both imply political leadership, and they're understood by the Arabs as if they are the exact same thing. Now, even though this narration is only narrated by Samurah ibn Jundub, the people who narrate it from Samurah ibn Jundub, they narrate different versions of it. There's different variations of it, even though it's one man who narrated it from the Prophet ﷺ, yet his students who narrated from him, each of them narrated a slightly different version. So if we are to gather all of them, and I have gathered the main ones, the pretty much all the versions I've gathered, some will be strong, some will be weak, but when you put them all together, you'll kind of understand what was being said by the Prophet ﷺ. And this is important because this narration causes a lot of confusion for people. And I really do not understand why it confuses people, because it's quite clear what is being said. So let's go over the different variations according to the narrators who narrated from Jundub. First of all, you have the narration of Simak from Samurah ibn Jundub. And he says, لا يزال الإسلام عزيزا إلى 12 خليفة. Islam shall remain aziz, strong, in a state of strength, power, glory, until 12 Caliphs. Next is a narration of Ibn Abi Amr from Abdul-Malik. He says, لا يزال أمر الناس ماضيا ما وليهم 12 رجل. He says the people's affairs shall progress, they shall be conducted well, as long as they're led by 12 men, as long as they're led by 12 men. Ibn Mahdi from Abdul-Malik says, لا يزال هذا الأمر صالحا. He says, this matter shall remain good, meaning the matter of the religion, the matter of the faith, until 12 chiefs rule. حتى يكون 12 أميرا. Next is Abu Abdul-Samad from Abdul-Malik. He says, لا يزال هذا الدين عزيزا أو قال لا يزال الناس بخير. He says, this religion shall remain strong, or, meaning the narrator was unsure, or he said, the people shall remain in goodness until 12 Caliphs pass, until the time of 12 Caliphs pass. Dawood from Ash-Sha'bi, he says, this matter shall remain strong until 12 Caliphs. Mujalid from Ash-Sha'bi, and this is a weak version because of Mujalid, he says, إن هذا الدين لن يزال ظاهرا على من نواه. This religion shall remain victorious over its opponents, unharmed by those who oppose it or abandon it, until 12 caliphs from my nation come to pass. Okay? Next one is Ibn Aoun from Ash-Shabi again. He says, this religion shall remain strong and fortified. Azizan mani'an. Mani'an is resilient, fortified. Until 12 caliphs. Next is Amr bin Sa'd. He says, لا يزال الدين قائما. Okay? He says the religion will remain to be upright until the hour. Okay? Meaning until the time the hour passes. Here the narrator is also confused. He says, or he said, you are ruled by 12 caliphs, all from Quraysh. So he says the religion shall remain strong or upright until the hour passes, or until you're ruled by 12. He was unsure which one it was. Ismail bin Hurmuz from Hurmuz, he says, the religion shall remain to be upright until you are ruled by 12 caliphs. And this one has an addition. He says, the nation shall gather united behind them or around them. Okay? So this is a weaker one, but it has this interesting addition. Next is Fitr from Hurmuz. Fitr is a Shi'i, of course. He says, this matter shall continue to be appropriate or adequate. Mu'atiyan or muqariba, meaning things will be well, until the rule of 12 caliphs. Next is Hussein. He says, لا يزال هذا الدين قائما حتى يقوم 12. The religion will continue to be upright until the rule of 12 caliphs. And Hussein, again in a different narration, this matter shall not come to pass until 12 caliphs rule them. And final one is by Musayyib. He says, this matter will remain to be victorious, unharmed by the opposition of any opponent, until 12 from my nation receive authority, all of them from Quraysh. So it is quite clear what is being said. So what does this mean? Okay, what does this narration mean? And that's what we're going to talk about next. So when the Prophet ﷺ says, this matter, this religion shall remain strong or resilient, until 12 caliphs come to pass, until the time of 12 caliphs. By the time the 12th one comes, it will kind of weaken, basically. That's what is being said. So what does he mean when he says Islam shall remain strong and resilient? The strength of Islam, there's a difference of opinion. Some say that it means political strength, but I believe it means spiritual strength and the strength of the religion, the faith itself, and the people's hearts. Because the strength of a religion or a faith is reflected by the piety of the followers, how they worship. Are they guided? Are they following correct guidance or not? This is why the Prophet ﷺ says the best generation is my generation, then those after it, then those after it. Meaning each generation will be generally better than the other, okay, until you reach at about the time of the 12th caliph, it would have weakened so much that it loses a lot of its strength, basically. So we're talking about the religious and spiritual condition of the nation, as in a very low number of deviants. There's not that many deviations in the first early days of Islam. The innovations were less than the innovations in our time, and the presence of knowledgeable ones. There were many knowledgeable ones. There was Al-Hasan al-Basri, there was Ibn Ishaq, Ali Zain al-Abidin. All of those early scholars, contribute to the strength of Islam. So it clearly is talking about the strength of the religious condition of the Muslims, not the political strength, because at the end of time, so the Muslims will be many, yet Islam will be weak. As the Prophet ﷺ said, they will be like the foam. Second of all, a very important point, this is a major point, not all of these 12 caliphs will be pious or righteous. The Prophet ﷺ, and this confuses a lot of people, he never praised the 12 caliphs. He just said the religion will continue to be good, until the rule of 12 caliphs. So the religion was good in the time of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and so on, etc., until you reach number 12. He didn't say that the 12 ones are all good. For example, Yazid, biggest example here, he was not a good man, he was corrupt. Yet, religion was strong in his time in the sense that there was a lot of knowledgeable scholars. There wasn't many innovations. Faith was strong in people's hearts, as compared to today, of course. And that is what is meant here. There is no praise whatsoever for the 12 caliphs in this narration. And the evidence for this is that the Prophet ﷺ himself says in an authentic narration, he says, the succession upon the guidance of prophethood shall be for 30 years, which is the time of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and 6 months of Al-Hasan. What does that mean? It means that there's a succession which is upon the guidance of prophethood, and then there's succession which is not following exactly that guidance. So this shows that they're not exactly all praised. Third point that we learn from this is that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning the prophet promised that this will happen, and it did happen. Islam was in fact strong until about the time of the 12th Caliph of Islam. So this was fulfilled, and all 12 were from Quraysh, exactly as the Prophet ﷺ said. So this was fulfilled and realized. Now there's, of course, the weaker editions, such as, for example, the edition of the nation shall gather around them. This is weak because you can't even apply this to most people. Like, for example, the Shia would want to use this. It won't even fit Ali ibn Abi Talib, because Ali ibn Abi Talib, he was rejected by all of Sham, which is Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine today. He was rejected by all of Sham. He was then rejected by there was an army of Talha and Zubair who were able to form an army from the people of Mecca and Medina, and these people were not approving of him. And then you have his own followers, such as the Khawarij, who also split from him. And so the nation did not all gather around him. Doesn't that mean he's not a legitimate caliph? Well, all we're trying to say here is that this edition is weak. It was a later edition. As you saw, it's only found in one of the versions. Nobody else narrated it. So that further proves that it is weak. Now, why this narration of 12 caliphs? Why doesn't it fit the Shia beliefs or the Shia description? Because they'd like to code it to serve their own agenda and to propagate their own beliefs. Well, it doesn't really fit them for the following reasons. First of all, the Shia leaders were not 12. They were 11. The 11th one died without a son. And if they insist on him having a son, then they should prove it. The guy never existed. And the evidence of his existence is very flimsy. Rumors at best. It was rumors at best by some weirdos or unknown people. So we do not even acknowledge the existence of the 12th one. They can't even prove that. The only reason they fabricated this character was because after the death of the 11th one, they reached a roadblock in which the wealth of their 11th Imam had to be distributed, and there was an issue between his mother and basically his brother, and then the political Shia who were gathering a lot of the money, and they had a lot of the cash on them. It's a different topic for a different video, of course. So the first point is that they did not have 12 leaders. They only had 11. Okay. Second of all, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning the Prophet said there has to be 12 leaders after him, all of them from Quraysh, who shall rule the people, and the affairs of the people will be good in their time. Well, the Shia 12 leaders never ruled except Ali and Al-Hasan. Only these two ruled. The remaining 10 leaders that they have, none of them ruled. Okay, so it does not also fit in that, meaning it does not agree with what the Prophet ﷺ said clearly and explicitly in Arabic. Third of all, the narrations, as you all know, says that Islam shall be strong and fortified and resilient, and the people's matters will be conducted well and all of that, during the time of the first 12 caliphs. Well, assuming that these 12 are the 12 of the Shia don't even believe that Islam was strong in their time. They believe that Islam was hijacked, that the true religion was hidden, that deviance spread, that all the companions apostated except for like 5, that the imams had to do taqiyya, they couldn't even propagate the correct teachings, that Ali was like, basically his wife was beaten, he was disgraced and tied up with a rope, and he was sitting in his house fearful from the tyrant rulers and all of that. So for them to say that Islam was in a state of glory, this contradicts their view. It also contradicts their view that the world will be filled with injustice and tyranny before the 12th Imam assumes power. So that automatically means that things are not well. If the world is filled with tyranny and injustice, before the 12th Imam appears, that means that Islam was not strong and fortified and doing well, in the time of the 12th leaders. And next is a very important point. The Prophet says that all of them will be from Quraysh. Now the Prophet ﷺ would not state a general statement if he intended only Ali ibn Abi Talib and 11 of his children. This is a known matter in the matters of eloquence, in the matters of clarifying the religion. The Prophet ﷺ would not say something extremely so general while intending something very, very narrow and specific. Because the Quraysh is the tribe of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and the rest of them. So he wouldn't say that. He would have said from Ali's children or from Bani Hashim at least. An example of this, just to show you how ridiculous it is. Imagine the Quran has a verse that says, "The believers shall receive zakat." And so upon reading this, all the believers, they head to the Prophet in order to receive their zakat. And the Prophet tells them, "Oh, no, I'm sorry. The believers here are only Zayd and Harith." That makes no sense, because if only Zayd and Harith were to receive zakat, the verse would have clearly said only Zayd and Harith received the zakat. It wouldn't say the believers, so as to confuse everybody into thinking that they're going to all receive zakat. So you get the point. And just we all know that the people's affair, according to the Shia, were not being conducted well. I don't think Abdul-Malik bin Marwan was conducting things well, according to the Shia, while Al-Baqir was sitting in his house hiding and not conducting anything. Now, there's weak narration, for example, like the narration from Mujalid, from that says that Ibn Mas'ud, he said that somebody asked him how many caliphs shall rule over this nation, and he says they are the number of Nuqaba Bani Israel. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says they are the number of Nuqaba Bani Israel. Of course, this is weak. Okay. First of all, it's a lie, because we've been ruled by about 120 caliphs so far, and the world has not ended. Second of all, there's still the same points as before. The Shia Imams were not 12. They never ruled, and they were not caliphs. Okay. and the Prophet ﷺ clearly says in an authentic narration that there is no prophet after me, but there will be khulafa. وَسَيَكُونُ بَعْدِ خُلَفَاء فَيَكْثُرُونَ. There will be after me caliphs, and they shall be many. And the word يَكْثُرُونَ, kathara in Arabic, in the Arabic language, means a plenty and a majority and abundance of them. For example, in Arabic they say kathura shaybuhu, meaning the gray hairs in his beard increased a lot. And that's not talking about 5 or 6 or 7 hairs. That's talking about at least 100 hairs, 50 hairs, a major number, not 12, 10, something like that. That's not kathra. That does not imply it linguistically. The next important point that we're going to discuss is the Sunni opinion. Now that we've discussed the Shia opinion, which is a terribly weak one, we're going to talk about the Sunni opinion as to who are these 12. First of all, if knowing their identity was important, the Prophet ﷺ, we would have mentioned their identity quite clearly. He wasn't really afraid of anybody. And in Sunni, in Orthodox Sunni Islam, there are 2 opinions. One is a strong one is a weak one. We start with the strong opinion. The strong opinion says, according to the text of the narration, it is clear that these 12 will be consecutive, meaning when each one dies, he will be succeeded by the other. It doesn't mention any gaps in between. Okay? In this sense, there would be, and obviously you get different scholars having different lists, but after gathering all of them and checking them out, the list that we have researched and conducted would be as follows, based on the clear laws of Khilafah and Imamah in Islam. First one is the successor of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He's number 1. Number 2 is Umar ibn Khattab. Number 3 is Uthman ibn Affan. Number 4 is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Number 5 is Al-Hasan. Okay? And he's the last Rashidi Khalifa. Okay. Number 6 is Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. He's the first king. Number 7 is Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Okay? Unfortunately, not a good man, but he did receive legitimate bay'ah, meaning the people, the majority of the people, the heads of the people, all gave him bay'ah. Okay? And he was in command of the armies, and he was in command of the states of the affairs of the state. He was the official Khalifa of his time. We may not like it, but that's reality. In his time, a couple of people rebelled. Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam, Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu. After Yazid ibn Muawiyah died, the legitimate Khalifa was Abdullah ibn Zubair. Okay? His legitimacy was established the moment Yazid died. You know, because the Prophet says when there's two caliphs, the second one is not legitimate. The Prophet ﷺ says this in the authentic narration. Whenever there's two caliphs, the one that comes after, later, he's illegitimate. Okay? So Abdullah ibn Zubair was illegitimate in the time of Yazid, but when Yazid died, Abdullah ibn Zubair was the only Khalifa. So he became the Khalifa, the legitimate Khalifa at the time. After him, after Abdullah ibn Zubair, you know, you had, of course, Muawiyah bin Yazid, but he died and he never did anything. Marwan ibn al-Hakam is not listed among the 12 simply because Marwan ibn al-Hakam, he lived and died in the time of Abdullah ibn Zubair, and Abdullah ibn Zubair was a legitimate Khalif, so Marwan ibn al-Hakam is not counted. Abdullah ibn Zubair dies. After him, the legitimate Khalif becomes Abdul-Malik bin Marwan. Okay? After Abdul-Malik bin Marwan is Walid bin Abdul-Malik, he's number 10. Number 11 is Sulaiman bin Abdul-Malik. Number 12 is Umar bin Abdul-Aziz. And after Umar bin Abdul-Aziz died, deviance began to spread a lot more, and Islam was a bit weakened politically as well on top of it. What's the biggest issue with this? The biggest issue with this is an emotional one. A lot of people are going to be offended that Yazid is counted among the 12. Okay. However, that does not mean he's not an imam. Imam means in Arabic leader. Imama, leadership, is nothing more than a position. It is a job. Okay? You can be very bad at your job, but you are still doing that job. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in many narrations that there will be pious imams and that there will be corrupt, impious imams, you know. And he also said that the best of your imams are those whom you make dua for them and they make dua for you. And the worst of your imams are those that you curse them and they curse you. So Yazid ruling the Muslims was a reality, the same way that Pharaoh ruling the Jews was also a reality. So this is a very important thing, and keep this in mind. The Prophet never praised the 12. This is nothing special to be one of the 12. It was just describing this condition of the religion at the beginning of Islam. That's all it was. So Yazid being from the 12 is not a big deal, and there's no issue whatsoever. Second opinion is the weaker opinion among Ahlul Sunnah, is that these 12 were pious, you know, although this was not listed in the narration, I remind you. And their rule is not consecutive, they're not continuous, there's gaps. So in this case, you'll get people listing Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, Hassan, maybe Abdullah ibn Zubair, maybe Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and some people will count Al-Mahdi as the 12th one. However, this view is kind of pointless in terms of being a wasted effort. First of all, there's no evidence for it, as we said. Second of all, you're going to waste your time and effort wondering who these 12 are. You know, whereas in the first group, you already know who you are and your mind is at ease and you don't bother with this pathetic detail. Second of all, lastly, I mean, this view could be problematic, because what if we're ruled by more good people than 12? You don't know, the world may end after like 50,000 years, you know, and we could be ruled by many good people in that time. What are you going to do then? You know, and they could be from Quraysh as well, you know, so it'll exactly fit with the narration. Quraysh today is by the millions upon millions. So that's all we have to say for this narration. I hope it was useful. Please comment, subscribe, and all of that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and see you later.